Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're delving into, well, a pretty compelling paradox. Imagine a country that's consistently hailed around the world for its robust democracy, its progressive stance, strong civil liberties. A real beacon in Latin America. Now, picture that same nation, quietly, almost secretly, rolling out a powerful state-controlled digital surveillance system, one designed to monitor pretty much all forms of communication. So what does this tell us about that tension, that push and pull between security and individual freedom, even in societies we think of as the freest? We're taking a deep dive into this fascinating and sometimes, yeah, unsettling world of surveillance tech in Uruguay, and we're focusing specifically on a system known as El Guardian.
It really is an intriguing case study. I mean, despite Uruguay's well-earned reputation for upholding human rights, democratic traditions, the story of El Guardian, it just shows how complex it is for any nation, really, to navigate these demands. National security on one hand, individual privacy in the digital age on the other. So today, we'll be tracing the origins of El Guardian, looking into its pretty formidable technical capabilities. We'll break down the legal frameworks that are supposed to govern its use, and, of course, examine the controversies that have popped up since it was deployed. And we're drawing all this directly from the detailed sources you shared with us. It's kind of a microcosm, isn't it, of this bigger global tension between keeping people safe and protecting liberty in the 21st century.
Right. And our mission today is to sift through this stack of articles and research. We want to pull out the most important nuggets, the key insights and lessons. We want you to walk away not just understanding what El Guardian is, but really grasping its broader implications for society, for governance, and for that constant, often uneasy balance between collective safety and our individual rights. We'll look at the facts, the verifiable stuff, the public controversies, and those really big questions that just naturally come up when advanced technology gives governments this kind of gaze. A gaze that feels, well, to some people, unnervingly like Big Brother.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. The genesis of this system, what some have, maybe a bit dramatically, called Uruguay's super spy. The public's first real hint about El Guardian came pretty quietly, actually. It was back in July 2013. The newspaper El País broke the news about its secret purchase. And what jumps out immediately is this wasn't your standard, transparent public tender process. Not at all. Its acquisition was handled initially as a secret of state. That means an exceptional direct purchase, completely bypassing the usual ways governments buy things. And this software, this sophisticated system, it wasn't cheap. The license alone, US $2 million, plus another US $200,000 every year just for maintenance. Now, for a country the size of Uruguay, that's a pretty significant investment, especially one wrapped in so much secrecy right from the start. It immediately signaled that trust, maybe even more than efficiency, was going to be the system's biggest hurdle from day one.
You're absolutely right. That initial secrecy for what is undeniably such a powerful tool, it immediately set up a dynamic of mistrust. Even in a country like Uruguay, which is known for its democratic transparency. And another intriguing point is that El Guardian didn't just, appear overnight after they bought it. It actually took nearly 2 years to get fully operational. It finally came online sometime between April and May of 2015. The Ministry of Interior, they were the main players here, not just in buying it, but in overseeing its rollout too. The company behind the tech is Digitro Tecnologia Ltda. They're based in Brazil. And it's worth noting they also provide services to the Brazilian Federal Police. And this isn't like an isolated incident of secretive tech buying. Brazil has seen plenty of controversy over similar surveillance tools. Their army, their police, they've openly admitted using this kind of technology. And there were real concerns raised about its use during big public events, like the 2013 Confederations Cup. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this regional pattern,
It kind of suggests governments are snapping up these powerful new technologies, often way ahead of public understanding or, crucially, robust oversight. It just created a really challenging environment for public trust and accountability in Uruguay, right from the get-go.
Okay, so given all that secrecy in the background, what exactly did Uruguay buy? What are the actual super spy functions of El Guardian? The descriptions we have in the sources, they paint a pretty vivid picture, almost unsettling, really. It's consistently called a modern interception program. And its capacity, it's described as being able to listen to and read all interactions. And we're talking comprehensive monitoring here across basically every common way we communicate. Traditional phone calls, both landlines and cell phones, emails, even social media platforms. But the sheer scale of its simultaneous monitoring capacity is what really blows you away. The system can reportedly monitor up to 800 cell phones, 200 fixed lines, and 100 email or social media accounts, all at the same time. Just think about that. That's potentially enough to monitor the entire mobile communication of a small town all at once. It makes it an incredibly potent tool for widespread surveillance, even if the intention is targeted investigations. And what's even more striking are the claims from people who supposedly know the system well. Insiders, maybe? They claim El Guardian can intervene, listen to, read all kinds of communication, including encrypted apps like WhatsApp and Telegram. Calls made through those apps, regular phone lines, without exceptions, is the quote. That's few. Well, that's a truly pervasive reach into our private digital lives.
It's a profound shift, absolutely. And to really get our heads around its operational breadth, we need to be clear about something. El Guardian itself, it's primarily the data collection system, but it works hand in glove with another critical piece. It's called the Sistema Automatizado de Interceptaciones Legales, or SAIL. Think of SAIL as the legal gateway for El Guardian. It's an independent IT tool specifically designed to digitally process those judicial interception orders. From a tech standpoint, SAIL is pretty sophisticated. It's a full web system running on ICE, developed mostly with Microsoft tech like .NET and SQL Server. Uses things like MVC.NET Framework 4.0 Plus and Windows Workflow Foundation, Windows Communication Foundation. And crucially, the sources note it complies with OS best practices for security. That's, a global standard to make sure web apps are secure against common attacks, which indicates, at least in theory, a design aimed at preventing hacking and unauthorized access. Pretty vital for a system like this. The way it's supposed to work, the operational flow, is designed to be very precise. Police need an interception. First, they get a judicial order. That order is then sent digitally to the phone companies or internet providers. The operators, after they confirm the order's legitimacy with the judge, they provide the technical access points for the information. Then El Guardian steps in. It collects, organizes, and processes this huge amount of intercepted data. What's really revolutionary here is the system's ability to systematize all that data, cross-reference it, analyze it at speed and scale, something totally impossible with the old ways. And to manage all this new tech and data, they created a new special unit, the Unit for Technological Support, UNITEC, within the Ministry of Interior, specifically tasked with implementing and managing these solutions. So you might be wondering, how does this compare to how surveillance used to work? Well, it's a complete transformation from manual, fragmented, probably pretty inefficient efforts to this centralized, digitally managed behemoth intended to be precise, powerful.
That's a really critical distinction, yeah. The shift from those fragmented older methods to the sophisticated centralized system. Before El Guardian, the way surveillance in Uruguay is described sounds almost, antiquated. The sources say this new system was meant to replace 21 separate operations, often homemade, independent listening posts scattered across the country. We're talking units within 19 different police headquarters, plus the specialized directorates for intelligence and organized crime. Can you imagine the old process? Police get a paper judicial order manually. Then they have to coordinate directly with individual phone companies. Then literally physically extract information from computers to give to the judges. It sounds laborious, decentralized, and probably incredibly slow compared to what El Guardian promised.
Precisely. And the Ministry of Interior's argument for making this huge shift, was compelling, at least on paper. They argued that a single centralized software system like El Guardian would actually provide much more guarantees and lead to a more transparent process than all those fragmented, informal, less standardized systems it replaced. They highlighted the security features they built in, or intended to build in, like electronic signatures required for every critical step, from the initial police request to the prosecutor saying yes and the judge giving the final authorization. This digital chain of custody, they argued, really boosts accountability, creates an undeniable audit trail. And it's important to stress again, the police themselves, they don't perform the interception directly. That technical part still rests with the telephone and internet operators. El Guardian just collects, organizes, and processes the information after it's intercepted. And here's a crucial safeguard, legally speaking. Without that judicial authorization, any information collected is basically worthless. It loses its value as legal evidence, can't be used in court. Plus, the system is designed to be auditable. So theoretically, you can directly compare the judicial orders with what the system actually processed internally. But here's where it gets really interesting, and it's a point worth pausing on. While centralization was pitched as the solution for transparency and control, it also concentrated immense power into a single system. That creates this incredibly powerful single point of access. If that gets compromised or if oversight somehow fails, the implications could be far, far greater and more widespread than those smaller, disconnected homemade systems ever could be. It's a classic double-edged sword, isn't it?
Right. So on paper, it definitely sounds like Uruguay tried to build a system with some pretty robust safeguards baked in. Let's dig into this legal framework and oversight a bit more. And critically, look at the theory versus what seems to have played out in reality. The basic legal requirement is crystal clear. It's emphasized again and again in our sources. All interceptions using El Guardian must have prior judicial authorization. That's non-negotiable, full stop. The key document that formalizes this whole process is the Protocol for Action for Legal Interception of Communications. That was signed back on December 1st, 2015. And it was a collaborative effort involving the Ministry of Interior, the Supreme Court of Justice, the SCJ, and the Prosecutor's Office, all trying to set out clear, unambiguous rules for using this powerful tool.
And what's fascinating here is the sheer level of detail in that protocol. I mean, it sounds incredibly robust on paper, designed to prevent abuse, right? But the critical question for us always becomes, how does it actually play out in practice? This whole protocol, it's managed precisely through that sales system we talked about earlier. The process starts with police officers filling out digital forms for interception requests. These forms then get automatically routed to the right penal prosecutor for evaluation. If the prosecutor approves, the request then gets digitally sent to the judge for the final decision, authorize or deny. And every single one of those steps, the police request, the prosecutor's evaluation, the judge's decision, requires an electronic signature. Theoretically, that creates an ironclad, undeniable digital trail. But the oversight doesn't stop there. The protocol also mandates quarterly reporting. UNATEC, that special unit in the Ministry of Interior, is required to send detailed reports to the SCJ, the Supreme Court, covering all the legal interceptions managed through the system. These reports have key quantitative data. Number of requests, how many approved, how many rejected by judges, the types and quantities of measures carried out by each telecom operator. And to add another layer of checks and balances, the telecom operators themselves have to submit their own quarterly reports to both the SCJ and the prosecutor's office. This allows for cross-referencing. It's designed to verify consistency between what the judges ordered and what was actually intercepted. And there's a more recent development too, Decree N-Degree 359021 from October 2021. It legally requires telecom operators to hang on to communication data for 2 years, specifically for judicial consultation if needed. The legal framework is very explicit. Any intervention without a judicial order, it's illegal. Its results are null and void in court. And the person who did it commits a crime. So the system is designed to be legally sound, with multiple layers of digital accountability and cross-verification built right in. It creates this expectation of near-perfect transparency.
Okay, with all those detailed procedural safeguards, it's clear Uruguay is trying to walk a very fine line here. Balancing the, let's face it, undeniable needs of national security and law enforcement against fundamental human rights like privacy. At the heart of this whole discussion are these critical legal and constitutional principles. Specifically, the deeply embedded right to privacy and intimacy and the secrecy of telecommunications. The sources really emphasize that electronic surveillance, it can't just be used for any crime or just because it's convenient. It has to be absolutely necessary, which means it needs to be rigorously proven that the information thereafter simply cannot be obtained by any other, less intrusive means. That introduces a powerful principle of last resort, right? A high bar for intervention. And then there's the crucial principle of proportionality. Any violation of someone's privacy has to be carefully weighed against the legal good they're trying to protect, or the potential harm a criminal organization might cause society. These principles, necessity and proportionality, they're meant to be the ethical and legal compass here, guiding the use of this extraordinarily powerful tool, making sure it's not misused.
Right, and expanding on that, electronic surveillance in this context, it actually has a dual purpose, which makes its reach even broader. It's not just about the direct, real-time interception of a communication like listening to a phone call or reading an email as it happens. It also includes the ability to request critical information about subscribers from the phone companies, even without intercepting the content itself. This could be metadata, subscriber identity, connection logs, maybe even location data. Important investigative leads. And here's a key legal difference, especially if you compare it to general data protection laws where consent is usually king. Here, consent from the individual is explicitly not required if a valid judicial order exists. That's a critical legal bypass that enables criminal investigations, absolutely. But it's also where a lot of the privacy concerns naturally arise. Now, what about the data itself? Once it's intercepted, it's not supposed to be kept forever. Officially, it's supposed to be archived only until the person involved completes their sentence. And then, importantly, it is supposed to be destroyed. Access to this archived info is meant to be strictly limited. Only judicial operators directly involved in the case and the defense counsel. The aim is to prevent unauthorized access or indefinite storage of sensitive personal data. However, there's this persistent call for more transparency from civil society, from experts. Raul Echeverria, for instance, he's the CEO of LACNIC, the Latin American and Caribbean Internet Addresses Registry. He argued publicly that citizens have a right to know about potential infringements on their rights. He drew an analogy. saying it's like how the public knows about less sensitive government buys, like police cars. Why not surveillance tech? So what does this all mean for your personal communications? It means that pretty much all modern forms, landlines, mobile calls, emails, social media, they can be monitored and intercepted. But only if a judicial order is in place, and only if all those elaborate legal and procedural formalities are met. It definitely blurs that line between our public and private digital spaces.
Okay, now here's where, as you said, the rubber meets the road. Despite all these meticulously crafted theoretical safeguards, these protocols, the sources reveal some pretty significant institutional friction and some concerning practical weaknesses in the oversight. There seems to be a breach, as one source nicely put it, between the legal intent and the operational reality. A particularly striking controversy came up when the former Interior Minister, Eduardo Bonomi, claimed publicly that the judiciary hadn't actually appointed a specific person responsible for receiving those crucial sale reports, the quarterly summaries meant to ensure transparency. But this claim was directly and very publicly rejected by the Supreme Court of Justice, the SCJ. Now, this isn't just some minor administrative squabble. This is a public disagreement between two core branches of government over who's actually minding the store for this powerful surveillance tool. That kind of public friction, it points to potential institutional dysfunction, right? A breakdown in communication, maybe. Or perhaps just fundamental flaws in how these vital oversight mechanisms are being implemented in practice.
And this raises an important question, doesn't it? If the very institutions meant to oversee this powerful tool are publicly disagreeing like this, how can we, the public, really be sure about the checks and balances? Such a disconnect between the de jure legal frameworks, what's written down in law and protocol, and the de facto operational implementation, what's actually happening day to day, well, it can severely compromise the whole system's integrity. It could easily lead to a significant lack of accountability, even if, technically, formal judicial orders are being obtained for every interception. This gap suggests that just having legal safeguards, no matter how detailed or well-intentioned they are, it's simply not enough. You need active, consistent, transparent collaboration between all the government branches involved. Absolutely critical. Plus, you need clear assignment of responsibility, who does what, and seamless, trust-based information flow between them. Without those elements, the system, even though it's designed for oversight, becomes vulnerable. It develops blind spots, makes it much harder to spot and prevent potential abuses or even just simple operational mistakes. It's a stark reminder, really, that even the best laid plans can fall apart without sustained cooperation between institutions.
All right, let's move from the theory and the framework to some concrete instances. Because Guardián has definitely been under intense scrutiny, there are documented cases and controversies that highlight some really serious concerns. One thing that kept fueling public anxiety, the sense of opacity around the system, was a revelation back in November 2022. The Tribunal de Cuentas, that's Uruguay's Court of Accounts, kind of a financial watchdog, they authorized another secret purchase. This time it was for new functionalities for El Guardián. Cost a hefty US $1,098,060, again, from the original Brazilian provider, Digitro. And the justification for keeping this secret offered by former Minister Bonomi was, well, chillingly simple. He said it was to prevent people from knowing what is happening. You can imagine how that statement landed. It didn't exactly soothe public worries about transparency and accountability. If anything, it deepened concerns that critical information about state surveillance was deliberately being kept hidden from citizens.
Yeah, that persistent secrecy around updates, around new functionalities, it's particularly troubling when you put it next to the fact that the system's use has been escalating dramatically. We have official figures from the Ministry of Interior, and they show a startling trend. Interceptions nearly tripled in just 4 years.
Yeah.
They went from 4,881 back in 2019 to a staggering 12,439 in 2022. Now, that drastic increase, it's not just a statistic. It suggests a growing, maybe even normalized, reliance on El Guardián as a fundamental tool for investigations across a much broader range of cases, potentially. It might be broadening its application way beyond the original intent, which was supposedly focused on severe organized crime. And that expansion, it has significant implications. It could signal a normalization of extensive digital surveillance, maybe leading to its use even when less intrusive methods could work, or for a wider variety of less serious offenses. Think about that scale of increase. It's a massive expansion of the state's ability to monitor private communications. And it puts immense pressure on those judicial oversight mechanisms, doesn't it? To scrutinize every single request properly, ensuring each one is truly, absolutely necessary and proportional. The big question becomes, is the system being used more because crime has actually tripled? Or is it because the tool is just there, powerful, and maybe too easy to reach for?
And then came the highest profile controversy, the one that really thrust El Guardian into the public spotlight and ignited widespread outrage. I'm talking about the infamous Astesiano case. This involved Alejandro Astesiano, who unbelievably was the former presidential security chief, head of security for the president himself. And he faced this incredibly grave accusation, offering access to El Guardian to an Argentine businessman. This deeply disturbing allegation surfaced based on WhatsApp conversations recovered directly from Astesiano's own phone, which created this chilling direct link between a very high-ranking official right at the center of power and the alleged potential misuse of this incredibly powerful surveillance tool. The fallout for public trust was immediate and severe.
Oh, the Astesiano case was absolutely a pivotal moment for public trust. It really shook people's confidence in Uruguay's surveillance apparatus. The Ministry of Interior, they quickly issued a strong denial. They stated emphatically it was impossible to perform an interception without both a judicial and a prosecutorial order. They were essentially pointing back to those legal safeguards we just discussed, saying the system works. However, Prosecutor Gabriela Fossati, who was leading the investigation into Astesiano, she complicated that official line quite a bit. She stated publicly that she couldn't actually be certain whether Astesiano had effectively accessed the system or not, which left this lingering ambiguity, directly contradicting the ministry's reassurance. That critical gap, combined with the sheer nature of the allegations, it just reignited widespread public debate, and it fueled renewed calls for much greater citizen oversight of these powerful technologies. And this raises an important question, right? Even with protocols, however robust they seem on paper, how secure is such a sensitive system from internal misuse, or from attempts by individuals, especially high-level ones, to just circumvent the legal safeguards? The case clearly showed that tension between the theoretical protections and the very real practical vulnerabilities of any powerful system. It showed, I guess, that even the best locks are useless if someone inside misuses the keys.
And the concerns didn't just stop with Astesiano. Further revelations came out in April 2024, and they uncovered more alarming operational vulnerabilities, things that really strike at the heart of internal accountability. It was reported that police agents were accessing El Guardian using, get this, borrowed keys, shared credentials, basically. Now, this isn't just some minor technical glitch. It points to a deeply systemic issue where established access protocols are maybe being routinely ignored. And disturbingly, the former intelligence chief, Mariana Mora, she couldn't even guarantee to a judge that this practice, the sharing of credentials, was not widespread within the police force. We even got specific examples. A police agent named Silcar Lara, apparently the son of another official, used a colleague's key because his own was reportedly blocked. Similarly, another agent, Walter Emmerin, reportedly accessed the system with a key given to him by his boss, claiming it was the only available user. These instances, they demonstrate a shocking lack of strict access control, and they highlight a profound operational vulnerability that really undermines the entire legal framework. Makes you wonder about the chain of command, how seriously internal procedures are actually being followed.
Absolutely. These revelations about borrowed keys, they expose deep, fundamental systemic vulnerabilities. In access control, yes, but also in internal auditing and just general accountability mechanisms within El Guardian. The fact that a former intelligence chief couldn't definitively state that shared credentials weren't widespread, that's particularly alarming. It suggests that operational practices might be routinely circumventing, or at least significantly weakening, the very legal safeguards designed to protect citizens' privacy. And what's even more concerning is what happened next. An investigation was actually launched against the journalist Eduardo Prive, who was the one who reported these leaks in the first place. Now, that immediately raised serious concerns for press freedom. It was widely seen as potentially an attempt to identify the police sources who leaked the information, rather than genuinely addressing the underlying security flaws and the alleged misuse of power. These kinds of documented instances, alleged misuse, deficient internal controls, they severely erode public trust in the integrity of state surveillance. They transform abstract worries about privacy into concrete, chilling fears. Fears of power abuse, of a genuine Big Brother scenario emerging. Ultimately, this just underscores that legal frameworks alone, they're simply not enough. They have to be backed up by robust internal policies, strict accountability for personnel, ongoing training, and, critically, real protection for whistleblowers, people who bravely bring these kinds of issues to light. So what does this all mean for you, the citizen? It means even in a democracy with strong laws on the books, the potential for internal threats to privacy, for systems to be exploited from within, It's a very real concern, and it requires constant vigilant oversight from everyone.
Okay, let's widen our lens a bit now, beyond just Guardian. Because while it's maybe the most prominent system, it's actually just one piece of a much broader and rapidly expanding surveillance ecosystem that's developing across Uruguay. The Ministry of Interior isn't only focused on intercepting communications, they're actively and very visibly expanding urban video surveillance too. For example, there's a project called Pueblos Unidos, United Towns, which has already added 200 cameras, significantly boosting visual coverage in various communities. In the Department of San Jose, they already have 297 cameras spread across 100 sites, but they're planning to install another 265 cameras in 84 more locations. That's a huge increase. Even in a smaller urban area like Ciudad del Plata, there are 80 cameras active now, with another 100 planned. And this isn't just the Ministry of Interior. Montevideo City Hall, the city government, operates its own extensive system, 230 traffic monitoring cameras across more than 100 points in the city. It forms its own closed-circuit television network. Now, while these are primarily for traffic management, they undeniably contribute to the overall urban surveillance footprint, right? They capture a vast amount of visual data about public life.
And here's where it gets really interesting and potentially changes the game completely. This isn't just about recording things anymore. It's moving into the realm of trying to anticipate behavior. And that raises a whole different set of profound questions about freedom, about anonymity in public spaces. A truly significant strategic step forward is the integration of artificial intelligence AI software into 2,000 of the Ministry of Interior's existing cameras. This AI system, it isn't just passively recording. It's designed with a specific active purpose, to identify actions or behavioral patterns that are statistically associated with criminal activities, and then to generate immediate automated alerts for the Command and Control Unit, the CCU. This represents a fundamental shift, from passive recording to active, intelligent, and potentially predictive policing. It drastically increases the scale and efficiency of surveillance way beyond what humans alone could do. And this expansion isn't just limited to public streets and squares, it's extending into more sensitive places too. Over 400 public educational centers in Montevideo are now incorporating video surveillance systems. That brings continuous monitoring into everyday environments, including places frequented by children and young people. This widespread rollout of advanced video surveillance, especially when combined with the communication interception capabilities of Guardián, well, it paints a picture of an increasingly comprehensive and pervasive surveillance state. And this raises huge concerns about mass surveillance, obviously, about the potential for algorithmic bias AI identifying certain behaviors or people as suspicious based on flawed data, which could disproportionately affect certain groups, concerns about the erosion of anonymity in public, and about the aggregation of all these different data points to create incredibly detailed profiles of citizens, even if the stated goal is simply crime prevention. It's really an evolution of surveillance, isn't it? From reactive to proactive, with all the complex ethical questions that come along with that.
Yeah, and beyond the fixed cameras and the AI, Uruguay is also embracing other advanced monitoring tools, adding more layers to this growing web of surveillance, drones, for instance. They've emerged as a significant component. They were explicitly mentioned in the context of that Asticiano case, remember, reportedly used for identifying license plates, tracking trucks. That indicates they're being deployed in actual, on-the-ground surveillance operations. In fact, the Personal Data Regulatory and Control Unit, the URCDP, they felt it was necessary to issue a whole drone guide for data protection. That acknowledges their widespread use and the privacy issues they raise. Another key piece is automated license plate reader systems, ALPRs. The technology company Sonda has implemented 300 of these, both fixed and mobile, in Montevideo. Some are even integrated into patrol vehicles, allowing for widespread continuous tracking of vehicle movements right across the city. This multifaceted approach, combining aerial surveillance with drones, ground-based cameras with AI, digital monitoring with Guardián, and now vehicle tracking with ALPRs, it creates an increasingly intricate and pervasive web.
It really demonstrates the emergence of what you could call a truly complex and hybrid surveillance ecosystem. It involves this dynamic interplay between both state actors and non-state actors. It's no longer just the government doing the watching. Private security companies are increasingly significant players in this whole landscape. Companies like Grupo Gamma, Securitas Uruguay, they offer a wide array of electronic and physical security solutions, to homes, to businesses, including sophisticated CCTV networks, alarm systems, access control, remote monitoring. Many of these private systems offer things like video verification services, where operators actually analyze real-time footage if an alarm goes off, and they have rapid mobile response units. Now, this widespread adoption of private surveillance, it really blurs the traditional lines of responsibility, and it raises critical questions like who actually owns the data collected by a private camera on a shop front? What are the protocols for sharing data between these private companies and law enforcement? Is there sharing? How is it regulated? And crucially, what's the regulatory oversight for these private surveillance operations? Is it as stringent as for state systems? Probably not. While private systems undoubtedly address individual security needs, individual concerns, their collective impact when you add them all up can be just as ubiquitous, just as comprehensive as state surveillance, but often with far less transparency and subject to much less public scrutiny. So what does this all mean for you, the average citizen? Well, your daily life, from your morning commute to dropping your kids at school to walking downtown, is increasingly subject to this complex, interconnected web of surveillance, both public and private. And the full implications of that interconnectedness, who ultimately has access to all that data, who controls it, well, those are questions that are still very much unfolding.
It's easy to get focused just on Uruguay, but you're right, it's crucial to zoom out. Recognize this isn't some isolated phenomenon happening just there. It's part of a general and frankly deeply concerning trend right across Latin America, the increased acquisition and use of commercial surveillance technologies by states. And often these sophisticated tools are rolled out without adequate legal safeguards, without strong institutional checks, which leads to alarming instances of abuse, frequently targeting human rights defenders, journalists, political activists, people challenging the status quo. And the region carries this heavy, painful history, doesn't it, of disproportionate data collection, pervasive surveillance mechanisms, often within a culture where transparency is limited, and unfortunately, impunity for those who misuse power is all too common. That historical context makes this current trend, this rapid tech adoption, even more worrying.
Which raises an important question then. Given this broader regional context, how truly unique are Uruguay's challenges? Or is it really just part of a much larger, maybe even global pattern of surveillance expansion, particularly in the global south? Our sources detail this pattern pretty extensively. It shows Uruguay is far from alone here. For instance, the top surveillance company host countries, the US, the UK, France, Germany, Israel. They all have a strong, active presence in Latin American state negotiations for these technologies. They're selling this stuff across the region. We've seen examples of incredibly invasive malware like Pegasus from Israel's NSO group, used in Mexico, used in Panama to achieve absolute control over devices. And this isn't just listening in. Pegasus allows operators to remotely turn on cameras, microphones, track your location constantly, record every single keystroke, often used against journalists, human rights defenders, even government investigators themselves. Then there's hacking team malware. That's from an Italian company, acquired by a startling number of authorities right across the region. Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras, Panama, Peru, Paraguay, Uruguay, Venezuela, Guatemala. The list is long. Finfisher malware from the UK's Gamma Group International that's also been reported in Mexico, Paraguay, Venezuela, Brazil especially, with its hosting of mega events like the World Cup, the Olympics. It became this huge marketplace for surveillance tech. They host international fairs like LAD Defense and Security, where these companies openly exhibit their wares. Hacking teams celebrate Gamma International. They're all there. And it's not just state actors. Private companies are increasingly deploying pervasive surveillance too. For example, Brazil's huge mining company, Vale SA, they've been alleged to have surveilled land rights defenders, environmental activists. Shopping malls in Chile have been found using facial recognition tech, sometimes even with police support. We also see these big partnerships. Global tech giants like IBM, Cisco, Microsoft partnering with governments for smart cities initiatives, integrated command centers, CICCs, SICCs, systems designed to monitor and collect data from entire cities. Even more concerning are systems like Venezuela's biometric system, requiring fingerprint enrollment for citizens just to buy essential food and medicine, effectively making basic survival conditional on giving up your biometric data. Or the use of drones. In Rio de Janeiro, they call it Centinela Carioca. In Chile, too. Used for monitoring crowds, favelas, even indigenous communities. This widespread adoption often happening under a cloak of secrecy, lacking robust oversight. It really underscores that Uruguay's experience, while significant, it's part of a much larger region-wide challenge, where rapid technological advancement is consistently outpacing effective regulations, outpacing human rights protections. It's truly a global phenomenon, but with these very deep, very local impacts.
Okay, this extensive discussion brings us right to the core tension of our dip dive today, the crucial human rights dimension. And that constant, uneasy balancing act between security and liberty. Uruguay really stands out globally in many ways. It's consistently ranked among the world's freest countries by organizations like Freedom House, often getting impressive scores, like 97 out of 100 back in 2022, praised for strong political rights, strong civil liberties. Yet there's this undeniable paradox, isn't there? This overwhelmingly positive international assessment exists in stark tension with all these internal controversies surrounding El Guardian. Its secret acquisition, the alleged abuses we've talked about, and this broader accelerating expansion of surveillance infrastructure within the country itself. How do we even begin to reconcile these two seemingly contradictory realities?
It's a great question. This Freedom House paradox, as you've nicely put it, it really suggests a critical gap. A gap between Uruguay's de jure democratic institutions, what's legally enshrined, what's celebrated internationally, and the de facto implementation, the practical application of those rights in this rapidly evolving digital surveillance world. A high overall freedom ranking, while definitely commendable, it doesn't automatically guarantee absolute protection against every single form of state intrusion, especially not in the nuanced, fast-moving digital domain. There are specific concerns that while Uruguay is generally open and progressive, certain legislative moves, like the Law of Urgent Consideration, the LUC, passed in 2020, could potentially threaten peaceful protest, could increase police powers, potentially shifting that balance. Additionally, civil society groups are particularly worried about the Ministry of Interior's potential use of facial recognition software, often without clear regulatory frameworks in place first. They fear its widespread deployment, its potential for misuse, for bias. This highlights how even in well-established democracies, these advanced surveillance technologies can create entirely new, maybe unforeseen, pressures on civil liberties. It demands constant vigilance from everyone, citizens, lawmakers, courts, and proactive adaptation of our legal and oversight mechanisms to maintain that delicate balance. It really means the fight for privacy isn't static, is it? It's an ongoing negotiation, constantly needing adjustment in the face of technological progress.
Now, to address these profound challenges, Uruguay does have existing legal and institutional frameworks. They are designed to protect its citizens. The country has ratified key international human rights treaties, most notably the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, which firmly enshrines the fundamental right to privacy. And on the national level, there are specific data protection laws. Law Enjuries 18.331 is a prominent example, designed specifically to regulate how personal data is handled. These legal instruments, they're meant to provide the bedrock, the foundation of protection for citizens' digital and personal privacy.
But you might rightly ask, as we touched on before, if these robust laws and institutions are already in place, why are these issues still coming up? Why the controversies? It really points to that common challenge we see everywhere. Technology often outpaces regulation, or at least it outpaces the practical enforcement of regulation. Despite these formal protections, all the documented controversies we've discussed, the initial secrecy around El Guardián, the alleged abuses like Asticiano, the persistent shared credential problems, those public disputes between government branches, they all strongly suggest a significant gap. A gap between the legal framework on paper and its effective, consistent implementation on the ground. Sure, the Personal Data Regulatory and Control Unit, the URCDP, it plays a role. It issues resolutions, guides on video surveillance in various contexts, trying to ensure data protection. Similarly, the National Human Rights Institution and Ombudsman, the INDDHH, has important monitoring functions. However, the consistent emergence of these issues just highlights that the mere existence of laws isn't enough. It's a practical, consistent, transparent application and enforcement that truly matters. International human rights standards, for instance, they heavily emphasize those principles of necessity and proportionality as absolutely essential for any legitimate surveillance. It has to be a last resort. Its intrusiveness must match the severity of the crime being investigated. The continued controversies in Uruguay suggest that these core principles are not always being effectively translated into daily practice, which makes the formal protections less potent when faced with rapidly evolving, increasingly pervasive surveillance capabilities.
Which brings us to the absolutely indispensable role of civil society and their persistent calls for much greater transparency and accountability. Organizations like Kinfo in Uruguay, they've been particularly active, particularly vocal, consistently demanding explicit information, accountability, transparency regarding El Guardián. They've been a crucial independent voice, pushing back against that culture of secrecy we saw early on. And they're not alone. Other prominent human rights organizations in Uruguay, Amnesty International Uruguay, SERPAJ, others are also actively involved, monitoring, defending human rights within the country, forming this critical network of watchdogs.
Their importance really cannot be overstated. These organizations, They serve as an essential, independent counterbalance to state power, especially in a context where state surveillance can so easily become opaque, prone to abuse. They are tireless advocates for fundamental civil liberties, constantly pushing for greater transparency, greater accountability, ensuring that the public discourse doesn't just focus on security at the expense of our fundamental rights. Their efforts are absolutely vital in exposing potential abuses and ensuring the public conversation includes a robust focus on human rights, not just the state's narrative about pursuing security. A strong, independent civil society is truly indispensable for maintaining those democratic checks and balances, especially when you're dealing with powerful state technologies that can directly affect fundamental rights. They provide that critical external audit, a voice for those who might otherwise be unheard. And in this vein, groups like ALCERT, that's a collective of Latin American human rights organizations, they put forth some specific, quite comprehensive recommendations, not just aimed at states, but also at the companies that make and sell these technologies. To states, they recommend implementing robust regulatory frameworks for transparency, for accountability in how surveillance tech is acquired, plus specific legislation for using surveillance tools like hacking software, malware, drones, biometric systems. This legislation, they argue, must be based on strict necessity and proportionality, must include independent judicial authorization and oversight, must ensure auditable systems, provide transparency on capabilities, and guarantee notification and effective remedy for people targeted. They also call for genuinely independent oversight bodies, human rights due diligence in all technology acquisitions, and meaningful penalties for companies that violate rights. And to the companies themselves also recommends they actively avoid causing or contributing to human rights impacts. They need to diligently work to prevent and mitigate any adverse impacts linked to their tech. Acknowledge their responsibility. Only partner with public authorities if those principles necessity, proportionality, transparency, accountability are demonstrably met. Furthermore, companies should establish clear policies for internal investigations if misuse occurs, for contract termination if abuse happens, for robust human rights due diligence, cooperation with investigations, and effective remediation mechanisms for anyone harmed by their tech. This is where the debate gets really important, isn't it? How do we ensure that the pursuit of security, often with very compelling justifications, doesn't inadvertently undermine the very freedoms it's supposed to protect, especially when incredibly advanced, powerful technology is involved? Hashtag tag outro.
So we've really unpacked quite a story today. The complex, sometimes contradictory, and definitely evolving story of El Guardián in Uruguay's broader, expanding surveillance landscape. We've seen a country that genuinely prides itself on democratic freedoms, grappling with powerful new technologies. Technologies designed for security, yes, but often acquired in secrecy. Technologies whose use has tripled dramatically and which continue to face these persistent questions about oversight, about accountability, and about their profound impact on individual rights. From that initial clandestine purchase, through the high-profile controversies like the Estesiano case and those unsettling revelations about shared police credentials, that tension, that core tension between the perceived need for security and the absolute imperative of protecting privacy, it remains a central and largely unresolved challenge.
Yeah, and the journey of El Guardian it really highlights a universal truth, I think, for the digital age, applicable far beyond Uruguay, and that is the mere existence of strong laws on the books, it's simply not enough. Effective oversight requires continuous, active vigilance. It requires transparent implementation across all levels of government and robust mechanisms for accountability across all branches, legislative, executive, judicial. Crucially, it also demands a strong, independent civil society acting as that vital check on power. The crucial question for Uruguay, and really for all of us globally, is how do we embrace technological advancement for public safety? Because there are real benefits there without inadvertently creating a Big Brother scenario, one that erodes the fundamental rights, the trust, the transparency that are essential to a healthy functioning democracy. This balance is not static. It's not something you achieve once and forget about. It requires constant reevaluation, difficult public conversations, and proactive adaptation as technology keeps evolving and society's needs keep shifting.
So what stands out to you from this deep dive today? How do you personally weigh the benefits of enhanced security against the potential risks to individual privacy, maybe in your own country or even just in your daily life? Definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive.